Merry Christmas, Alex Cross. Written by James Patterson. Read by Michael Boatman, Stephen Kunkin, and Kristen Milioti. Prologue. The Devil on Christmas Eve. 1. The rear door to St. Anthony's Church had been left open, exactly as I had been promised. John Sampson and I eased in through the dimly lit sacristy, the room where the priests dressed for services and where they stored the altar wine, the hymnals, and the vestments. "Sugar, I hope we don't have to shoot some dude in a church," Sampson said in a stage whisper. "Your Nana'd be predicting me for a slot in the fire." "Especially if you pulled the trigger in church tonight." "Not funny, Alex." "Who's laughing, John? If you shot someone in a church on Christmas Eve and I didn't stop you, Nana Mama would be signing me up for a slot right next to you in the Big Burn." We made our way along a short, narrow hallway that led to the darkened apse and the altar itself. We stayed in the hall, looking out. Except for some flickering votives, some dim overheads, and a hanging candle near the altar table, there was no light in the church. There couldn't have been more than 3 or 4 people in the place. An old woman clicking her rosary beads, a homeless guy napping in the front pew, an older man reading a prayer book and muttering curses. I carefully checked out each of them. Then a young girl in a fur coat, a coat way too fancy for St. Anthony's, barged out of the confessional box on the near side of the church. She was sobbing into a long, striped scarf. The priest came out after her. Father Harris placed his hand on her shoulder and led her to a pew, knelt by her. The padre was a very nice guy and a very good priest, the kind of man you did favors for if you could. I looked around at the huge wreaths and balsam roping that decorated the church. I'd been attending St. Anthony's since I was 10 years old, and I couldn't remember the place ever looking so bare at Christmas. In fact, the church looked depressing. I waited until I was sure all the worshippers had their heads down, and then I walked quickly across the front of the altar and knelt at the bottom of the stairs that led up to the carved oak pulpit. The Man Mountain stayed on the sacristy side and knelt among the bright red poinsettia plants, the lectern and the chairs used by the priest and altar boys between him and the pews. A moment later, the girl nodded and left. Father Harris paused, glanced toward our positions, and then went out a side door. Except for steam ticking in the registers, St. Anthony's felt quiet. Kneeling there with my back to the crucifix high on the rear wall felt odd and somehow wrong. Then again, the entire thing felt strange. I don't think I'd been on an altar in more than 35 years, not since I had been on that very altar making my confirmation when I was 12. That day, the bishop prayed over us as we were being confirmed, saying, "Fill them with your spirit of fear, O Lord." It's a prayer that I have always found peculiar because, as a rule, I see God as a source of courage and direction, not fear. But I'm not a priest, and so, as Samson likes to say, what do I know? We held our positions, in any case, and waited, knowing we had only an hour to pull this off. At 6, the priests and friars from the priory next door would come to prepare the church for midnight mass. At 6, this little stakeout would be over, and I'd be going home for a well-deserved holiday with my family. I have been called cynical more than once in my life. In my line of work, it's often tough to be positive or idealistic about much of anything. But as the minutes passed inside St. Anthony's, I smelled the incense and the fir boughs and watched the votive candles flickering near the manger scene, and I remembered coming here on Christmases past. There was a sameness to the place, a calm sense of the unchanging that got to me. I felt my muscles relax and my mind slowed to things that were important, like humbleness and gratitude, which Nana Mama always said were the keys to a long, satisfying life. Seeing how my grandmother was in her 90s and going strong, I tried hard to listen closely when she said stuff like that. Kneeling there behind the pulpit, I ignored the terrible things I'd seen in the year almost gone by, and thanked my Lord and Savior for all the blessings I'd received. My wife, my grandmother, my children, my friends, my job, my life. And as I did, I felt less cynical, humbled by my good fortune. My life was very good. Maybe not perfect, but very good. And not many people get to say that in this day and age, especially at this time of year. Maybe Nana Mama was right. I needed to come to church more. A whisper punctured the darkness. Samson among the poinsettias. Is this what they mean when they say they're using a cop as a plant? I just shook my head. Nothing like a bad pun to help pass the time on a church stakeout. I heard a clatter and looked around the pulpit. The older lady had dropped her rosary beads. She reached over, got them back from the pew in front of her. Then I saw someone come out from the confessional booth next to the one where the woman in the fur coat had been. He was a young guy, and he was a big guy. He slouched slowly up the center aisle, as if deep in prayer, moving toward the main doors. This had to be our man. I signaled Samson, and the two of us moved forward quickly, eased over the rail into the nave, and began walking up the side aisles, one of us on each side. We kept our right hands in our coats, fingers resting on our guns. The guy in question stepped out of the church proper and into the foyer and stopped at the holy water font. He dipped his left hand in and held it there. A left hand in holy water is a big no-no. Right hand only. And the font's no place to keep your fingers more than a second. Then I saw what I had half expected to. With his left hand still in the holy water font, he shook his right arm, and a pry bar slid out of the sleeve of his coat. Anticipating that he'd look around before attacking the parish donation and Franciscan charities boxes, I stopped with a pillar between us. The second I heard metal on metal, I snapped my fingers, got up my gun, and moved to meet and greet the man of the year who'd returned to rip off the poor. In church. On Christmas Eve. 2. Father Harris flipped a switch back in the sacristy. Every light in St. Anthony's went on. The man of the year bolted, carrying the crowbar like it was the baton in a relay race. He shouldered his way through the front door and bounded down the steps as the first snowflakes of the year began to fall. Samson and I were right behind him, and we were almost on top of the perp before he reached the corner. I got to him first and hammered him with my fist between the shoulder blades. He sprawled hard on the sidewalk. Samson put a knee on his back and cuffed him. It was done in less than a minute. I rolled him over, looked at my partner, and said, "John, say Merry Christmas to our old friend Latrell Lewis." "It is Lewis! Holy shit!" said Samson. And then, remembering he was still very close to the church, he added, "Oh, sorry about that." Latrell Lewis and I had had some unpleasant history together. It started 5 years ago when he was a 15-year-old bag messenger for one of the second-tier Columbia Heights gangs. Street name Lit Lat. The punk was arrogant enough to try going out on his own, and then stupid enough to get picked up by Samson and me the first week he was flying solo. Next time we took him in, Latrell ended up in a lovely spot in the Maryland countryside, Jessup Correctional Institution, for an 18-month swing. "I'd assumed you were a caged man, Lit-Lat," I said to him. "Maybe you should learn to count, or buy yourself a calendar, Cross." We pulled Louis up off the sidewalk. He was jittery, not just from nerves, but from cocaine or heroin or whatever drug he was buying with church money. I really didn't care. I'm a psychologist, but I was in no mood to make a diagnosis and give the man some pro bono counseling. "Come on, it's Christmas Eve. Show a brother a little heart," Louis said. "Yeah, we will," I answered. "We'll show you as much heart as you showed the church and the folks who need that money for food and shelter." Then we hustled him down the sidewalk toward an unmarked squad car. The wind picked up. The temperature was dropping. You could tell a real winter storm was coming on Christmas Eve. "Come on, man. Don't put me in no police car," Latrell moaned. "That'd be sad stuff for the holidays, man. I needed that cash to buy my kid a present. I'm poor, man." I looked up at the white sky. Then I looked down at this punk junkie and said, "You don't have a kid. You wouldn't be poor if you quit your habit. But it is Christmas, and I don't want you to be sad, Latrell." He looked up at me, hope all over his face. "Yeah? Yeah. I'll tell you what. On the way to the station, we'll all sing Christmas carols, and you get to pick the first one. And for your sake, it better be Silent Night," Samson said, shoving him in the back seat and slamming the door. Book 1. Merry Christmas, Alex. Chapter 1. They say it's good luck if it snows on Christmas Eve. I didn't usually buy into that kind of folk wisdom, but if it turned out to be true, well, this was looking like it'd be one of the best Christmases ever. A nor'easter was churning its way up the Carolinas at the same time as a cold front was diving south out of Ontario, all the makings for a monster storm along the eastern seaboard. Samson and I brought Louis in and booked him. Since there were no arraignments scheduled until the day after tomorrow, it looked like the man of the year would be waiting for Santa in a holding cell this Yuletide season. It was nearly 8 by the time we finished up the paperwork and left. "Merry Christmas, Alex," Samson said outside. "You too, John. Feel like stopping by for a holiday beverage tomorrow?" "I'll check with my scheduler," Samson said. I took a cab home. As the taxi moved through D.C., I looked out at the decorations glowing everywhere. The pace of the snow hadn't increased much yet, but the size of the flakes had. They were each about the diameter of a quarter, and thick, making the city look the way it does in those snow globes tourists buy at Union Station and the airports. By the time I reached our house on 5th Street in Southeast, it was close to 8:30. The air smelled of pecan pie. Bree and the kids were busy finishing trimming the tree, which was in the alcove by the window at the front of the house. And, of course, the official sergeant of all holidays, Nana Mama, was supervising every little task on her to-do list. "Don't put 2 green ornaments right next to each other, Damon. Show some style when you decorate a tree," she scolded with all the authority of the vice principal she'd once been. Bree was hooking a faded crayon drawing of the 3 wise men up on one of the branches. According to legend, I had made that ornament when I was in kindergarten, and Nana always dragged it out on Christmas. "Well, look who's come in from the snowstorm," Bree said, and she walked over and gave me a kiss on the lips. "Hello, sweetheart." Nana decided not to look in my direction. All she said was, "Is there a faint possibility, Alex, that you might spend a few minutes of the holiday season with your family? Or are we asking too much?" I should have had the wisdom to say nothing to Nana, to just give her a Christmas kiss. But I'll never learn. She pushes my buttons like nobody else on this earth. "Thanks for the guilt. All wrapped up in a bow for Christmas," I said, dispensing hugs to my daughter Janny, my son Damon, who was home on winter break from prep school, and then Ava, the foster child Nana had